What's up, everyone? We're so excited to have Kindra Hall with us today.
Hi.
You guys, Kindra is the best-selling author of Stories That Stick, which is the book we've all been reading during the month of February and loving it. Not only did I read it, but my business coach read it and my mom read it. Welcome, Kindra.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm so happy to be here.
I am too. You guys, I first discovered Kindra when she spoke to our company, and she was the keynote speaker, and she was such a good speaker. Like, we were all like, she's my best friend. Like, we love her because of your stories. It was your stories that like just sucked us in, and now we're all like Kindra Hall fans.
I feel the same way though. Like, I was definitely that we had a moment there. That's for sure. It was a moment.
We did, in my sequin jumper. So, okay, well, you guys, I want to make most of this time be Kindra, because she's got to pick up our kids in a little bit. And so, and people are saying they saw her in Orlando and all this. Love it. So, Kindra, tell us a little bit, just kind of recap kind of what it's all about and even why you wrote it.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. So I wrote the book Stories That Stick, and I have to say it was probably a book like 10 years in the making, maybe even longer than that. I told my first story when I was 11, and it was one of those moments where, you have something happen and you realize, like, wait, maybe I'm really onto something. Now, of course, you can't start a business or write a book when you're 11. I mean, you can. I'm going to encourage both of my children to start businesses and write books when they're 11. But as I grew, I went through college. I got my master's degree. I was in sales. I was in marketing. And I realized that this thing I had discovered when I was a kid was still so relevant. And while stories were my default, like, I would always default to telling a story when I was asked a question. I would default to a story when I was training on a particular sales topic, that it wasn't everybody's default. And so I started thinking, like, why don't people, A, understand the power of their stories, and then B, to understand how? Like, how do you create compelling stories? Where do you find them? Where can you be telling stories? So I feel like when it comes to books, I'm not the only book that was ever written about storytelling. So I'll just put that out there. But I felt like the other ones maybe didn't tap into that how part, and how in that it's really actually quite simple. Like, the stories are happening all around you. It's just a matter of choosing to tell them.
Yes. One of the things, and I'm not just saying this to flatter you, but one of the things that I love about the book, because I'm such a practical person, I'm like, but did it actually, like, for me, did it have impact when it's something I actually use? If it's like something I read and then I actually use later. And for me, there's been so many times where I'm like, ooh, like, I'll either notice someone telling a story and I'm like, that was so amazing and it makes me think of you. Or when I'm like, I need to share this story. Like, it's had a lot of impact on me and our whole tribe, because it's just like kind of encouraging us. Well, number one, that your story matters. And number two, to share it.
Yeah. Well, and I've been watching too, even on because so much communication happens now via social media. But I've been watching your feed, Kelly, and seeing that you are telling more stories. And I'm sure you've seen the difference even in the engagement, comments, likes, and even the messages that the public world doesn't see, the direct messages of the response to that.
Yeah, it's so true. The more that you tell your stories, and even the not so pretty ones, that's when people, I feel like, really connect and relate.
Well, so here's actually, I've been thinking about this a bit, because I obviously have social media accounts, and I do see that so often when I share the stories of my own struggle, be the really big stories or really small stories, those are the ones that people really respond to. The challenge with that is, right, like, you don't always want to be talking about negative, because we become the stories that we tell.
True.
Right. So if you are always sharing your stories of struggle, and those are then the stories that, like, as you write them, then you're telling them back to yourself, and as you go back and read your own captions, you're reaffirming that story. So that's my little, and again, this is I don't talk about this in stories that stick. Stories that stick is much more business than it is personal development. But I've been paying attention to that recently. Like, okay, it's okay if I share my stories of struggle outwardly, but inwardly, what stories am I focusing on in my life? What stories am I, like, making sure that I'm retelling myself? Struggle, yes, as long as it comes out on the other side, because I want to reaffirm that you can have struggle and then come out on the other side.
Yes, I think that's a really good point, because I think a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to air my dirty laundry, or I don't want to be like negative on social media. But I feel like if you are sharing, even if you're not a businesswoman, if you're sharing how you overcame something, like that is helping someone else.
I think, and so a good way to think of this is, and I think about this often, that when the story you're sharing is it, and when it comes to the end, it's negative, kind of like it's still negative, you are still in the middle of the story. Like, the story hasn't come all the way. And we've all had those moments in our lives, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's like we had, we're sitting here in New York. I mentioned we had this. And when we first looked at moving here, we rented this apartment. We rented a apartment, and we were going to move, and it was so exciting. And then the apartment got scooped out of, like, from our, like, we'd paid all the money, and the apartment got scooped right out from under us. And, like,
oh, no.
Our dreams stole the place we were going to live. Like, it was so, and we lived across the country at this point. And having that moment of, okay, so this isn't where the story, we're in the, how interesting. I'm in the middle of the story right now. Kelly, you and I talked the last time we were on a session together. I think the day before, I had just found out that I didn't make the New York Times bestseller list for Stories That Stick. Yeah. I'm happy to report I made the Wall Street Journal list and the USA Today list and all these other lists, which was awesome. So exciting. Yeah. But I really set the goal too to be on the New York Times bestseller list. Yeah. And it was interesting when that news came in, that I didn't make the list, which was a goal that I proclaimed, which was a goal that there was no holding back. Like, that was my goal. That's what I was shooting for. And I missed it. I didn't get it. Yeah. For whatever those reasons will be. And when that news came to me, I thought I would, like, start weeping and bawling. Everybody did. My husband was the one that delivered the news. And instead I thought to myself, I remember distinctly having the thought, oh, I'm in the middle of this story. Like, that end is coming for me. It's just not today, like I thought it would be. And so when you see, those stories of struggle, like, it's when you're on the other side of the struggle, and we can have many middle, like, you can struggle and overcome it, and then struggle again and overcome it, and then struggle again and overcome it, like it. And each time you're struggling to a new level,
right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's one way of using stories for those moments in your life where you're like, this is not. Have you seen the Taylor Swift documentary?
I only watched and then I had to go to bed, or I can't remember.
I can't do it. I can't do it anymore. But right at the beginning, where they're like, you didn't get nominated for whatever album it was, like the best album, and she said her first instinct was, I need to write a better album. And that's where it is, like, oh, I'm in the middle of this story. So next I'm going to write a better album.
Right. I love that. Yeah. So how do you share your story when you're in the middle of something? And should you?
That is a very good and personal question, in that I think that we're always in the middle of something.
It's true.
Right? Yep. So I'm in the middle of something right now, and you're in the middle. I'm in the middle of something on many different levels. I'm sure you are. We all are, right? Because our stories are always, until it's really the end, until we're in the ground, or our ashes are spread into whatever lake you want them spread into. We're in the middle. But I think really what it is you can't share your stories when you're in the middle, as long as you're acknowledging that that's where you are. And I think that whether it's internally or externally, I think that acknowledgement, that self-awareness of where you really are in the story is such a freeing thing. And when it's freeing for you, and when you can acknowledge that, what a gift that is when you share that story to other people and they're like, oh, I'm in the middle of my story too. I thought this was the end. I mean, think about all the boyfriends. Like, I think back to I don't often think back to the boyfriends. Michael, he worked from home too, right? So I just wanted him to know that way. But like each time one of those relationships ended and I thought it was the end of the story, and really it was just the middle. So
yes,
I think you have full permission to share that middle. But I think before you do, what a beautiful thing it is to recognize that that's what it is.
yes. Sometimes just like acknowledging the stories within us and that they're happening is like, so like you said, freeing.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna read some of these comments. Someone said, I used to hide my true self and hid behind my anxiety. I've learned to embrace it and share through stories, and have been amazed by the people that have been inspired by my stories. It's a story of overcoming the struggle of anxiety and how I've grown. I love knowing I can help people through my stories. And that's the power of stories, man. And,
yeah.
And one thing I want to share is like, I don't think all of our stories have to be, number one, big, like this mind blowing, which I think we should talk about in a minute. And then number two, they don't have to be like always like an overcut, like this super vulnerable struggle. No. It doesn't have to be a struggle story either. Sometimes being vulnerable is just being your true self. And that's what she was saying. I used to hide my true self. Sometimes just being vulnerable is like, this is me. Here I am as my hot mess self, you know?
I know. Well, and I think that's one of the things that is discussed in, I don't know if it would be in depth, but it's discussed in Stories That Stick. It's something that's really important to me, is that's one of the big myths about storytelling, is that it has to be some huge struggle. It has to be some tragic thing that you overcame. And it can really be like a simple, the key for powerful storytelling. And if you want your stories to be more impactful, they just have to be more real and more honest and more authentic. So, yeah. So for example, on Instagram, that's what I love about social media, is it's such a immediate way to share and watch the feedback on stories, right? So one day I posted this picture of my daughter. We were leaving ballet. She was in this beautiful pose. We had the benefit of the backdrop of Lincoln Center. Like, this is, I still can't believe that this is her life. And I hope someday that she realizes that this was her life and has some appreciation for it. Because right now she's 7 and she's like, oh, this is my life. And she doesn't realize, but that's a story for another time. That day, I took her to ballet, but I was really crabby about taking her to ballet. I didn't want to take her to ballet. I had other things I had to finish. I thought Michael was taking her to ballet. It was this whole, but don't we have those things, right? Where we're like, we have these moments where we're just like crabby and we're like, I don't want to. And then I watched her like dance herself all the way down the walkway and say, Mama, take a picture of me here in her perfect ballerina pose. And I took that photo and I thought to myself, oh, this is what bringing her to ballet is. Now that is in no way an over the top. Like, how many of you have been irritated that you have to shuttle your kids to and from places? And for most, like, I've had to do it many times since, and I did it many times before, and I never had that epiphany. But on that day, in that moment, it was just this little thing. And I think that the key is, not only for using stories strategically in business, because we know that as you share these stories, people connect with you more. So there's a financial and like business benefit to sharing small moments. But on the more personal side, when you start to recognize that these little moments are happening all the time. Today, for example, we were walking the kids to school, and there was this cab that cut another cab off and ran the other cab up on the curb, and all this honking, and like there's this cab on the curb, and we're watching all this as we're like walking to school. And I watched the cab that ran the one off the road get out, assess the damage with the other cat. They were kind of patted him on the back. They were, and then he stayed with them as they got the cat. They pulled it down, like, it's like, oh, there's this camaraderie there that, I don't know. Now that story isn't developed. It happened this morning, but something cool happened in that moment. And that's a story that could be shared.
Yeah. And someone just commented, and I love this comment. They said, sometimes sharing your story gets you through it. And I 100% agree with that, because if you've seen any of my posts in the past like month or so, my daughter moved out to go to Harrisville.
Does she live here now?
She lives in Utah. She was going to go to New York City, but she just changed her mind.
Okay.
She lives in Utah now. And that was like, that like broke me. Like, that was heart-wrenching to have my oldest and my only daughter move out. And so I shared that. And I realized I was kind of like going through grief stages, which is, I didn't really know you could do when you didn't lose a loved one.
Yeah. But it's a loss.
It was a loss, right? And so as I was reading through the stages of grief, it was saying that one of the stages is sharing your story. And I realized like that was helping me heal. And so many women like connected and related to that and shared some of their stories, which also helped me heal. And so sharing my story, I'm like getting chills. Sharing my story was like part of my helping me just like move through it and like accept and adapt to this new normal.
And like putting it out into, I feel like, again, it's very freeing putting those things out into the world. And so, you had asked, like, is it okay to share the story when you're in the middle? I mean, I think so. Like, yeah, there's all different ways to look at it, but for that reason, certainly it'll get you to the new normal, which then can be the foundation for the next normal, which then it keeps going. Because you got a long way to go. Wait, how old's your daughter?
She's 18.
Oh gosh. Like, my parents had it easy when I was 18, when I was 21, when I was 24, like you know how it goes.
Yeah. I would love to hear you touch upon, because I think somebody even commented and they said, that's my struggle. I feel like my story isn't anything special, so I don't feel like I have a lot to share. Like, sometimes people think they need this like mind-blowing, like I was homeless and now I'm not, or like, you know what I mean? Those kind of like rags to riches, or like, I lost 100 pounds. Like, it's got to be this mind-blowing story. And I don't think people realize the impact, like a small story, even just your ballet story. It's like that moment you realized why it was important to take your daughter to ballet,
Well, so from a very like specific business perspective, so let's put this into a business perspective. I open my keynote. So I'm a keynote speaker. So I speak for different conferences. I open my keynotes with a handful of different stories. I always open with a story. Sometimes it's a story about a bad haircut I got in 4th grade and my best friend in 5th grade. Is that mind-blowing? Like, no.
That's such a good point.
Yeah, sometimes I open my keynotes with a story about an assignment from my 12th grade physics class.
I remember that.
Yep. Nope. Not a huge story. Sometimes I open my stories with the story that you read for the opening of the book, which was Michael buying cologne.
One of my favorite stories. I loved that one.
But the thing to remember here is, so then in terms of business, you would think like, oh, she has these really small stories. Like, people will not keynote speak. If that's something that they feel called to do, they will not do it because they feel like they haven't climbed Mount Everest with, this many things wrong with them, right? Like, they won't, because they're like, my story isn't big enough.
Yeah.
And the truth is, I'm a successful businesswoman.
Yes,
with these very small stories. And that's one of the things that, as you go through stories that stick and you look at the key components, it isn't about making it over the top or super dramatic. The whole purpose of stories is that they connect people. Now, sometimes it's really cool to be connected in this like over the top way. but it's also really cool to be connected through stories that sound a lot like your own. Through an emotion that we've all felt before, through a mistake that we've all made, and then like, oh, why did I make that mistake? Some of the most powerful stories are the stories when you're like, oh my gosh, I have so been there before.
Yeah.
And they were just the person who told it, and you could be the person who tells it.
Yeah, and they are memorable. Someone just commented and said, I loved Kindra's opening story about the bad haircut. They remember that.
Because people have all had bad haircuts, or stories about exercise, or stories about old boyfriends, or whatever it is. Like, the small stories matter.
Yeah, and I want to mention this thought just came to my head, because again, not everyone watching this is a businesswoman, but like, I think it's important to share our stories with our loved ones, like, because those can be a legacy. And like my kids, like, this morning I just shared a tiny little story with my daughter, and she was like, oh my gosh, that makes me feel so much better. Because she was like, it made her feel less alone, that like, oh, my mom's been through that same thing. But it wasn't until I told a story that she felt like, okay, like, I'm not alone.
One of the most incredible things, and I know not everyone on here is a businesswoman, and not everyone on here may be a parent, but I want to use this as this parent lens for a moment, just to show that, yes, storytelling is not only relevant in business, and I'm so excited because I'm writing book 2. We're going to talk more about these kinds of things. I'm writing book 2. I'm thinking about book 2. So one of the things that we do in our family a lot, and any parent can do, is when your child endures a certain challenge, right? Like, they have a certain thing, maybe it's a challenge with a friend at school. Maybe it's a challenge, like our daughter, when we moved here, something with the dates of birth, she had to skip kindergarten and go straight into first grade.
Oh, wow.
Like, there's some important things they learn in kindergarten. She didn't get to do any of that. She's at a new school. It was a whole thing. Mm-hmm. That is a story.
Yes.
So we can tell, and we do tell our daughter over and over and over again. Because what does that story, how does that, every time, so as parents, as you see your kids go through different challenges, and it's hard because you're going through them with them, yes, keep a journal, make some notes, because they're not going to remember these challenges. They're living them. They're not going to remember them, but that's your job. And then your second job is to tell that story back to them. And again, they can be really small stories. They can be these small decisions or challenges or things that they've faced, because when you tell those stories back to them, you start to build this scaffolding of who they are as a person. Like, my daughter is a person who can be met with these incredible challenges and be able to just kind of like slide right through them. My son, like, we are already having to talk about girlfriends and whatever. He's in 3rd grade. I mean, I was an early bloomer, so I get it. But like, using these stories of his first heartbreak in 2nd grade, that story is going to be extremely valuable when he's in 8th grade, and it's going to be extremely valuable when he's in 11th grade. So as a parent, like, this goes so far beyond business. The stories are the way we understand our world. They're the way we understand ourselves. They're the way that we understand that we're not alone, that we're a part of something bigger. So if for no other reason, be telling yours and documenting yours. So, because it becomes like, think about the hieroglyphs that we've seen, in ancient times. Like, at some point, we are going to be ancient times, if it's not for global warming, but whatever. Like, at some point, this is going to be ancient times. Yeah. I want so many stories out in the world that they're like, oh, this is what life was.
Yes. And it empowers them, which is what we're all about, because it empowers them and says, if you did this hard thing in 1st grade, you can do this hard thing in 12th grade,
Do I get a recording of this? Because this has been so fun. But now I do. Speaking of bad mom, I have to go.
You go, and I'll tell them about your new course and all the things.
Yeah, and tell them to go to at Kindra Hall. I think I signed in on my like personal Facebook page, which I don't use. So I'm on Instagram at Kindra Hall. Kindra's with an I. So come find me there, and then you'll find me on Facebook, and we'll be good. This is so fun. I don't even know how to turn it off. I'm just going to shut my computer.
You're getting That's so funny. Okay, you guys, that was amazing. I loved hearing from Kindra. I feel like we could have talked for like an hour. But so many like good nuggets and takeaways from that in that short 20-minute chat. And so she has, I guess she's doing a course that she's actually filming it today. That's kind of like a working course to help you if you're a businesswoman, to help you figure out your stories and write them out. And so that's really exciting. Go follow her on Kindra Hall Instagram and check out her stories today because she's talking about that exciting upcoming course. So thank you all for hopping on. This was amazing, and we'll see you next time. Don't forget, our book for next month is, let me show you, is by Dave Hollis, and it's Get Out of Your Own Way. It hasn't even come out yet, so you'll have to pre-order it, but we get to hear from Dave Hollis next month. So I'm freaking out. I'm so stoked. So make sure you get the pre-order of that, and we'll see you next time, guys. Bye.